welcome to the regular council meeting for Tuesday, July 20th. Call the meeting to order. Approve of the agenda. Now the agenda is going to be amended to include a delegation under item 4.A. Blair Choquette, is that how from Fraser Health regarding some septic concerns. So with the agenda being amended, could I get someone to move that? Moved, seconded. Any discussion? See none. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Okay, public input. Public is permitted to provide comments to council on any item shown on this meeting agenda. 2-minute time limit applies to speakers, and if you could please put your name up and name and address, and it has to be pertaining to the agenda.
Got a blue light? You got a blue light. Okay. So all the glasses, I'm getting old. 3 things. In the minutes for last week, Stefan Mitchell.
Your name and address, please.
2305 East Road, Doug Richardson. It was stated at the last questions in the minutes that Stefan Mitchell's application for infill was denied by council. This is not true. It was not denied by council. So the minutes actually reflect what was stated, but the truth is it was never reflected or denied by council. The second thing is, in the Village of Anmore, in their communication and community engagement policy, I'm curious to know, in the definitions, the village includes staff and it includes council. It does not include committee members. And recently a committee member has used their position on the committee to falsely accuse somebody else, specifically a past mayor, of improper activities. So I think actually the committees should be included in the policy. And the last thing, in the community hub project manager, and likewise the extra marketing that the Anmore is asking for to be funded, which comes to some $223K, I don't believe that's allowed under the Community Charter and the Local Government Act. You did your 5-year plan. It was set in stone, and I don't think you can go raid the capital reserve to pay for stuff you didn't anticipate. So when you're talking about that, I would appreciate that discussion on are you allowed to or not allowed to.
Good.
My read is you're not allowed to, but you guys have more lawyers than me.
Okay, good. Thanks. Thank you. Any other public input? You have to come up and state your name and address, please.
Hello.
Hi.
Jubin Jalili, 1501 Crystal Creek. This is regarding item 11A. It was noted that Mayor McEwen's statement regarding social media and Anmore Conversations Facebook page were included in attachment 4. There's no attachment 4 in the link. There's none in the hard copy.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Elbert.
Thank you. I think maybe the speaker is referring to the minutes, and the attachments are included as part of the original minutes, and they will be posted on the website. We don't include the attachments on the approval of the agenda.
Okay. Any other public inputs? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. A delegation. We have Mr. Choquette from Health Protection Manager of Fraser Health regarding septic concerns in Anmore. Welcome, and thank you for coming. I know you juggled your schedule around to be able to facilitate this meeting, so really appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem. Okay, my name is Blair Choquette, as you've mentioned. I'm a Health Protection Manager with Fraser Health based out of Abbotsford. So I'd like to thank Council for the invitation to speak regarding Fraser Health's role in approving and monitoring on-site sewage disposal systems. I'll basically provide a brief overview of how the program is administered in Fraser Health, and will respond to any questions that Council has. One of my responsibilities is to oversee the administration of the land and the drinking water program within Fraser. It's a regional program. We have 5 inspectors that are assigned to that program, and they basically cover the whole health authority. So we go all the way from Burnaby to Boston Bar. Just in way of backgrounds, some of you may be aware of this. Back in 2005, there was a major shift in terms of how domestic on-site sewage disposal and treatment is regulated in BC, so that's anything with less than 5,000 gallons per day. A new piece of legislation was introduced, which was the sewage regulations. We moved from a prescriptive model, which was under the old regulations, to more of a professional reliance model. So standard of practice was established for authorized persons to follow. So an authorized person is a registered on-site waste practitioner or an engineer. The new model largely removed environmental health officers from the process of approving systems for new constructions, alterations, or repairs. So in terms of our roles, we basically have two roles right now. One is an administrative role. So an authorized person will submit a filing, a letter of certification documents for the new constructions, alterations, or repairs of the systems to the health authorities. Our admin staff will look and see that the filings and letters of certifications meet the documentation standards of the regulations. The environmental health officer has the discretion to review filings. Two things that will trigger an automatic review is, one is if a septic system was within 30 meters of a well, or there's a restrictive covenant. The DHO or the HO may defer acceptance of the filing when the information is missing or suspected to be false, or the officer believes that there will be a health hazard. So the only thing that right now that we're only issuing permits for is holding tanks. The other role that we have is compliance and enforcement. The Public Health Act and the SSR, sewage regulation, provides authority for the HO to intervene if a health hazard exists or is anticipated. So that holds the health authority to take compliance and enforcement action. The EHO is required to receive and respond to complaints, make a determination of a health hazard as related to an on-site sewage system, and then to take corrective action. We have the authority to conduct on-site inspections and issue orders based on that. So in a nutshell, that's basically our role as it sits with sewage. And I guess in terms of working collaboratively with local government, I think it's important that we work collaboratively. I mean, our resources are limited, and so we do rely on local officials to report issues to us and provide us support where necessary. So that's it. I don't know if there's any questions from council.
I've got a few questions.
Sure.
And again, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. So this was brought to my attention by a building inspector. He was doing some inspections and noticed that there was a drainage pipe getting put into our, from a remodel or something was getting put into one of our open ditches here, and followed up with it. He left repeated messages with your colleagues that simply weren't answered. And again, I just want a couple of questions. So you are the approval agency that approves septic systems in residential housings?
We don't approve, we accept. So it's a professional reliance model.
Okay.
So it is administrative, so they will submit fines. We do have the option to review them, but largely we're counting on professional. They operate under a code of conduct. But we do review it, but we don't approve it.
So those would be, you would need an engineered, some sort of engineering to come forward to you?
Engineer or registered on-site waste practitioner.
Okay, so I just want to be clear, our bylaw enforcement, as well as any of our people here, have no understanding or, authority whatsoever over these systems.
Yes.
Correct? So it is a little frustrating when calls are made to your office and nobody responds.
Yeah.
And that's when I got involved.
Yeah. No, and I did investigate that issue,
Yeah.
and I did review it. There was obviously confusion. I mean, in terms of addresses, I know 2 complaints came in at the same time, pretty much one right beside the other. So they were followed up on. An order was issued on one of them, and a letter was issued on the other. So.
Okay.
you know, again, the intent is to be as responsive as possible. We have to prioritize. I mean, if there's sewage that is ponding on an individual's property, that would take a lower precedence than sewage running down the street into a children's playground or into somebody's well. So we do prioritize them, but we do respond. We are obligated to respond.
In both of these cases, there was raw sewage that was ponding and then being transferred to ditches that would transverse a elementary school, just so you're aware of that. So now, how do you ensure systems are operating in compliance with the design and ongoing basis?
There's a requirement for owners. It's to maintain and operate their system. So there is no active monitoring of on-site sewage. There's literally hundreds of thousands that are installed. So there isn't an active monitoring. So we respond based on complaints. But there is a requirement for them to operate and maintain the system. But there's nothing in legislation that compels them to do so.
I guess that's where I come back to the fact that two complaints were filed and
Yep.
nobody did come out
Yep.
to follow up with
And that
these.
shouldn't happen.
Yep.
So
I guess my challenge is, and I'm just going to throw this out there, and I know you're not the person to answer this, but I find it amazing that a house that has an elevator in it has to have a yearly inspection and certification, yet a septic system doesn't. And with all the environmental and health and safety of neighbors and residents, I find that just absolutely shocking.
yeah.
So as these systems are engineered, and you are the approval process, or the acceptance is the words I think you used, do you ask for revised drawings to be submitted before any alterations and modifications take place?
It depends. There's a standard practice manual. Within the standard of practice manual, they do specify when a filing would be required.
So although when a new system comes in, it has to be engineered for your acceptance, when any modifications or anything else is done, then that's a bit of a gray area? Is that?
Well, it depends, right? I mean, there are things that would require it and things that would not. And it is to be done by an authorized person.
So in both of these instances, a landscaper was literally being brought in to get rid of that water.
Well, I can't get into the specifics,
Yeah.
but on the one, there was oversight by an authorized person that was having the landscaper do some of that work. And that's provided for in the legislation. So a homeowner working on their own property, and in this case it wouldn't be the landscaper, but if they're working on their own property, they can work under the supervision of an authorized person. They can do the installation.
I guess who knows that that's an authorized person? That's I guess where we're at. So
Well,
it's just-
and sometimes that comes out in the investigation. So that's why it is important to get out on site. And
Yeah.
like I said, the information that was provided by your local official was helpful. We did use part of that information in order to issue the order. So we will act on it. And then, like I said, in this case, unfortunately, there was some confusion and back and forth. And not to make excuses, but we've went from basically, we were down to 20% of our staff. 80% of our staff were reallocated to follow up COVID and deal with the hub. So we're just getting back after 14 months to quote unquote normal operations.
Yeah, I
So
guess,
I would like to see that this is the exception. It's not going to be the rule.
so when people have a concern about a neighboring septic system and they phone your office, we can be reliant that people will come out and do an investigation?
You will, yeah, we will follow it up accordingly, yes.
And then also involve the village so that the village is aware as well?
Yes, more than happy to
I
do
guess,
that.
the concern that I have is the amount of suites that are getting put into houses that probably weren't supposed to have suites, and then all of a sudden, these septic systems aren't complying,
Yeah.
and we're having all these issues that seem to be having, I've heard several others as well, that seem to just disappear with a bit of landscape pipe and a drain going somewhere.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I guess my concern, as a village that really touts its environment and concern for the health and safety of its residents, the significant issue that this brings forth in regards to putting sewage into our open ditch system, which is easily accessible. So this is very concerning to me, but I do thank you for coming here and explain it. And, hopefully I may pass this on to our Environment Committee, which at some point may want to put a letter into the Environment Ministry to make aware of what's really going on here.
Yeah, it would be, the Ministry of Health would be the place to send that letter.
Okay.
And I would be more than happy to, outside of council, to have a meeting with, your local officials and to discuss the issue and to look at, ways that we can work collaboratively to address it. Because it's difficult, right? I mean,
Unfortunately, we're the eyes and the ears, and people come knocking our door, phone us and stuff, and this is completely not in our sandbox.
Yep.
So
like I said, I'm totally open to working with local government.
Good. I'll just open up for the rest of council if there's any questions or.
Nothing.
No? Oh, Councillor Trowbridge.
Would that include potentially meeting with the Environment Committee, even though they are not staff specifically?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay, thank you very much for coming, and I really do appreciate you making the time to come.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Kind of scary, eh? Wow. Minutes. The minutes of the regular council hearing, adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting held on July 6, 2021. Could I get someone to move those minutes? Moved, seconded. Any discussion? See none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Is there any business arising from the minutes?
Sorry.
Councillor Trowbridge.
Doug raised an inaccuracy within the minutes. Are we going to modify that or address that? I don't know what the process is.
Ms. Elrick?
I'm sorry, the inaccuracy regarding,
I think the minutes were correctly.
that was stated at the meeting. And I think that what the speaker was saying is that he does not believe that to be true, but that is an accurate reflection of what was stated at the meeting.
Okay, good. Okay, so getting back to any business arising, anything else? No? Okay, we'll move on to, we don't have a consent agenda, so we're on to 11A, new business communications and community engagement policy number 70, deferred from the July 6, 2021 regular council meeting. Ms. Ulrich.
Thank you. So the policy is before council today, included on page 16 of the agenda package. And as stated before, the policy is setting out guidelines and communications criteria for engagement and monitoring on the village's social media, village social media terms of use, personal social media used for staff and individual members of council, as well as media relations and message and content approvals. Further, just to address the comment that was made earlier regarding including committees in this policy, we do have a separate policy, which is a council committee code of conduct, which has been approved by council and is distributed to all committee members when they join. And they also are required to follow rules that are outlined in our procedure guideline. So we do have that covered already. If council wishes to go through the policy, we can do that. I also would like to note that we have Ms. Therese Michelson here this evening, and she can provide her insight as to any items that council would like to inquire about on the policy as well.
Good, okay, well, I'll open up to council. Ms. Cryer, Councillor Cryer.
Thanks, Mayor McEwen, and thanks, Ms. Elrick. I do have a couple of questions. I did have the same question that Doug had regarding committees. That was something that was flagged as I was reading through everything. And I also want to say thank you for sending all of the other municipalities, all of their social media policies. I really appreciate that. So as I'm reading this, I recall saying to you that I felt like we're not recreating the wheel when we did this, but I feel like we are. And the reason I say that is in looking at all of the attachments that you had sent for us to review, I feel like what we're trying to do here is be everything to everyone, whereas when you look at, let's see, you sent me Vancouver, Langley, Coquitlam, Port Moody, and White Rock. They are strictly social media policies, whereas what we're trying to do here is quite a bit more than that. Let me just get the proper name. Social media and communications and community engagement policy. So I feel like that's a lot to knock out in one document. I see you. Go. Yes, go.
I'm terrible.
Blue button.
I'm terrible at just trying not to jump in. So one of the things is that you are a small municipality. So a lot of those others have media policies separate, and they have like a fairly robust media policy, and then they'll have a fairly robust communications and community engagement. So these kinds of policies are ideally tailored to the organization and its needs. Yours is a fairly small organization. You don't have a lot of different people involved. So one policy is actually a simpler way to have it covered, which is why we put it all in there. It's also tailored in a number of ways to you. Like for example, there's communities that I work with that don't even go on Facebook. So they have a policy that's tailored to what their council wants and what their council is trying to achieve. And that's what staff, and I worked with them on it as well, trying to put something together that addressed a gap in terms of the fact that you don't have a media policy, and also a gap in terms of not having any kind of written standards, professional standards around communications and community engagement. So that's the intent of putting it, not to try to be all things to all people. There are other organizations, usually the smaller ones, as opposed to the big cities that you were comparing it to, that have it all rolled up into one.
Okay. I wish I would have seen an example of that.
Trail would be one. The Peace River Regional District has that. They're smaller, right? So,
Right.
So they do have them as one policy.
Yeah, those would have been good, a couple of those to look at, because then we could be comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, and part of it too is that it still needs to fit for you.
Right.
So, whatever anybody else does, this has to work for what this council wants to achieve. As well, the framework that you want to have staff work within. Some policies are very restrictive, some are more broadly written, and trying to find the line that works for your council is really important. It's important for staff as well, because they need that framework to know to what point are they able to just independently make decisions and get things done, versus at what point do they need to take it to council for review. And when you're trying to get things out quickly and efficiently, you want to make sure the staff understand where's that line. And a policy compared to a procedure is that line in the sand. So I'm very cautious about looking at this and looking at through that lens, which was developed with what council or what staff felt was the direction you wanted. But at the same time, I would encourage you to look at it and go, okay, is what's in here necessary, like a line in the sand policy item, or is this something that maybe we should just have this in the communications procedures for staff to follow, so that there's some room.
Yeah,
Right.
those are good points. And further to that, or every single one of the ones that you sent me, they made reference to like an employee code of ethics. Do we have an employee code of ethics? Similar to what we have for committees, which I should have known that. I chair a committee and I've been on a committee.
So we don't have a specific staff code of ethics. Many of our professions individually have codes of ethics that we are required to follow as being a member
Right.
of that organization. But we do have other policies such as, respectful workplace. We have to follow those sort of workplace,
Okay.
work safe guidelines and regulations
Yeah.
as well.
Another thing that was a little puzzling to me is all of the ones that you had sent me, they make specific reference to council being exempt. Like the wordage is specifically, elected officials are exempt from these policies, with the exception of White Rock, had no mention of it, which I found puzzling because theirs was the most current, January 2020, whereas the city of Vancouver was so long, and it dates back to 2014. And that was almost a creation, like when, the socials started, they needed to come up with this framework. So that one there was no mention of council. And then there's the distinction between staff, and in our document, we have, the word is stakeholders was under the definitions, yet the word stakeholders not used in any of the any of the policy that's written, and I would have liked to have seen the definition of staff, where, so the scope was staff, contractors, and council representatives, council members, and another vague term, which was where my question came in about committee members, like where they fell in. So I guess I just felt like it was muddy, and there were some places where there was a contradiction that said CAO gets final approval, and other places it needs to be signed off for mayor and council. And I feel like most everything mayor and council, whether it's social media, whether it's proactive communication or something last minute, we should be involved in. So, yep.
I think that would be an extremely inhibiting policy. If every action that that staff wanted to do in
Right.
communications had to first go through and be reviewed and approved by every member of council, I think you would ground to a halt and would not be able to be
Right.
responsive. So I don't recommend that. I think that the reason why you're seeing different things is that there are different things. So for example, in a media relations situation, because the official spokesperson is the mayor, and the mayor is the person who's quoted in a news release, you're going to have the mayor approve those things because those are his words going out. So there is some differences because of the nature of the type of communication. But to have all communication vetted first through council is such an administrative level that I think it would be very difficult. And once it's in policy, staff can't make a move until every one of you has given your approval on it. I think it would be very difficult to administer.
And I completely understand that. So, just glancing at my notes, and I have pages of them, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I think I covered the bulk of what I wanted to say and the concerns that I have. I just feel like maybe we could simplify this a little bit. It was just a little too much, but I don't know. I would like to hear what everyone else has to say about it.
Teresa, sorry,
I'm sorry, I just realized I forgot to respond to you also about your question about the committee members. I think that, well, for one thing, I'm not familiar with any communications or social media policy that includes volunteers in an organization. And I think that it would also be very difficult to say, it's not to say that there's not exist. I'm sure if you search somewhere, you'd find some community, because they're always tailored, right? You could find some community. But I think it would be very difficult to say that you're going to impose a policy on just, if you're going to do committee volunteers, it would probably need to be everyone who ever volunteers in a volunteer capacity when they're active. So again, there is a code of conduct. I could look more to see, but I would find it surprising. I haven't seen that, and I work with a lot of local governments across the province.
Councilor Weber.
Just to the comment on the committees and speaking for the committees, I think the chair can speak for the committees, and we're elected and we're part of the policy. So I think that's kind of covered. It's kind of our job. I did have one question. It says on village social media use, the villages, on communications, but clarify what all social media sites shall be monitored. What does that mean? Is that all village social media sites or all social media sites in the village?
That wording was meant to be all village social media sites, because again, if it's in policy and we miss somewhere, somehow, in some social media, that would be.
So it's our own?
Yeah, anything that's on a village platform.
Okay. I was listening very closely to Councillor Creer. I guess I like the fact that we are a small organization. We don't want to get too much red tape, so it does kind of make sense to put the whole communications policy in one document. I don't really have a problem with it. I think it's one of these things, we want to improve communication, of course. I guess that policy is in order, and I would be willing to give it a try and see how it goes.
Councillor Trowbridge.
I don't know if I'm going down the right path here because I'm sort of skipping ahead, but is the execution of this policy predicated on the approval of the proposed budget?
That's a
to
good question.
whomever wants to answer?
I can answer that. It would be, if we are to continue with the level of effort that we are putting in right now, which is reflected in this policy in terms of monitoring and reporting and providing information out to the public, then there will be additional ongoing resources required unless, and I'll caveat that, council has another service or another area that they would like to pull those resources from.
So I'm going to have a hard time voting on this without knowing the cost of accomplishing that. And I'm not necessarily comfortable with these proposed budgets because I'm seeing them for the first time in the agenda package. With this, we haven't been able to vet this or go through it. So, you know, the one thing that I would segregate from this package, and I don't want to move to the next item, but the PM for the hub, that's something I'm comfortable talking about because we're deep into it. I am not well versed enough in the communication piece. I fully admit that to say I can justify these costs against these actions, to me, needs more discussion. I'm just going to have a hard time voting on that.
Good.
Personally.
Okay. Yeah, I'm of a similar thought. I'm just wondering if maybe we should leave this tabled at the moment, and then we just move on to the next item agenda. Okay. Sure.
Could we get copies of Trail and some of the ones that would
Peace
be,
River.
yeah, the ones that are smaller that do cover more than just social media?
Certainly, I can pull some of those. I believe you do have Trail already, but I may be mistaken. It was one of the ones that I used, but I spammed you guys a little bit, so I didn't.
Yeah, yeah, you did.
There's a lot of information there, so let me go through it
Yeah.
and pull out of my research some of the smaller communities to make sure that I have included those for your review.
Because Langley was in there twice, so.
Well, there's
I want-
township and city of
Yeah.
Langley.
Okay.
So that's why,
right,
and
yeah.
yeah,
And then
yeah. So
Vancouver, and they
let me
weren't.
take
Okay.
a further look and see what more information I can provide for you.
Thanks.
And I
Ms.
think Ms.
Nicholson.
Michelson
Yeah,
has
and
something.
I'll just have to ask Peace River Regional District for permission to share it because it's still, they're working on it again. I did an audit of their organization's communications and a number of recommendations for their policy change, and so that's why I know what's in it. But I just need to check with them first before I share it.
That's fine.
That's fair enough.
If
Okay.
someone
Yeah.
else already has it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, thank you. Okay, yeah, Councillor Lidler.
On these other municipalities that have got communications bylaws or whatever you want to call them, did they also have to hire additional people to do those? Or did they do them within the staff they already have?
The policy itself does not actually dictate the amount of work in sense of, you know, we're not saying that you're going to do this, and this. It just means you're going to be working within this framework. So most municipalities have a communications person, at least one, on staff or a half. So that person manages the monitoring and that person manages a lot of it. We don't actually have the monitoring outlined in the policy, and that's to a large degree deliberate, because if it's written in policy, there's again, it's that line in the sand that it says you're going to cover this, and this site all the time, and you're going to respond to this, and this every time, and that's just not, that's not something I'd recommend you put in a policy. So that, I myself don't think that this policy itself dictates a large increase of work. I think it's your organizational needs that are driving the increase in work, if I've articulated that
Good.
properly.
Okay.
Okay,
Oh,
that's interesting.
okay.
Yeah, I kind of had the same question that Councillor Trowbridge had, but you just answered it. And I think it's the kind of thing we could pass this policy and just have the policy in place, but if we don't pass the budget, it's probably not going to be easily implemented. But it doesn't mean it's not in place, you know, possibly for future council. So that's just one thing to consider.
Good, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to 11B, 2021 Ma Murray Day. Council to discuss options regarding this year's Ma Murray Day. Ms. Halliwell.
Thank you, Mayor McEwen. So I did have an opportunity to have a discussion with our events coordinator about some of her thoughts around what was going to be possible for Memorial Day if council so chose to move forward with such an event. So really, I'm happy to hear from council in terms of their thoughts. If you'd like me to share what some of her ideas are, I'd be happy to do that as well.
She's organized it the last 3 years?
3 years, I believe it's been.
Excluding last year.
Yeah, she's well aware of sort of the event. So she thought in terms of pulling something together. And again, we'd have to ensure, obviously, that we would still be able to, under the public health orders, as they stand right now.
Still be 50 people, or we don't know at that?
Yeah, so the next step of the BC Restart Plan is September 7th, and at that point, it would appear that events can really sort of open up. So it would be dependent on going to step 4. So we'd want to make sure we are aware of that. So her thoughts were the marketplace is certainly something that could be done. That that is really dependent on our residents and if they want to sign up for a table. We thought we would look to approach the Sasamet Volunteer Fire Department or Firefighters Association to do the food as they typically do. We wouldn't look at any other food trucks except possibly to have like an ice cream truck come up if it's available. We're not quite sure where everybody's at with that. The potential for maybe a bouncy castle for the kids, but again, not sure if people are doing events or anything like that, booking things out right now. And again, she could look into whether or not we could have a live band, and if not, the backup could be we could just be playing music through the speakers. So those were some of the ideas she thought of. I think, we had sort of said the car show wouldn't be a go for this year, as well as the sort of the additional children's sort of events, like we had those orb balls and the petting farm as well. We wouldn't look to do that, and the lawnmower race I think was the other one, because those are a little bit more involved. Maybe next year. And then the other recommendation she did have is for council's consideration is whether or not you might want to consider moving it back 1 week as well. So not only will we have September 7th as being the start of step 4, hopefully, if all goes as planned, that is also the first week back to school for kids, and so having it the immediate Sunday after that Labor Day weekend might be, we just might not attract as many people because everybody's trying to get back into the swing of things for fall. Yeah. So she had suggested maybe the 3rd Sunday instead of the 2nd Sunday in September. So I just put that out for council's consideration as well.
Good, thank you. Councillor Weber.
We still will need some volunteers. There's people that needed to man the cash booth and stuff like that. So is Sabina going to reach out to the village? I see a lot of volunteers here.
Yeah, absolutely. She would, as part of her job, she does coordinate all our volunteers, so I'm sure she would be reaching out to make sure we had adequate support.
Yeah, because it's been a struggle in the past. I agree with killing the car show. Most years it's just Councillor Trowbridge's cars and a couple of my cars, and that's the show. So it's not really taken off, so we should try something new. But I think everything you mentioned would be good.
I think the challenge that we have is really a tight timeline from what the regulations could possibly change to and what they are right now. So that's a big unknown to me, to put a lot of work into that. I think the key thing that we should be doing right now is asking Sabina, our event coordinator, to start soliciting out a list of volunteers, because again, these events take not 10 volunteers, they take 20, 30 volunteers for setup and breakdown. And I know on many occasions it's quite often you and me who do a lot of this. So I think that we need to see a commitment from the community that they want to have this, and the way that they can make it as a commitment is they can volunteer and see what goes into some of these events, because right after that we'll have Halloween and then we'll have Christmas coming up. So I think it's important that we get this out and we see where it's at, and then we sort of see where that volunteer list gets at the beginning of September to see if it is something that the community really wants, because maybe the community doesn't really want it and doesn't want to be that involved in it. So I think that's it. Councillor Weber.
Yeah, agreed. And also for ideas. I mean, we kind of keep doing the same thing over and over again. Like the lawnmower race, I know was popular, but it's a lot to organize. It'd be great to have a couple of people take that on, because it is a bit of work. But, you know, I think last time we were at Montmurray, there was a few people that came up to me that were disappointed. They wanted to enter, but they never bothered to enter. Oh, I just thought I could show up with my lawnmower. So that all needs to be organized. And of course, we want to keep it fresh. We want new ideas too. Maybe like the car show is getting old. Maybe the market's getting old. I don't know. But we need some fresh ideas.
Any other, Councillor Trowbridge?
Hey, there we go. Yeah, I kind of think, you know, the litmus test of asking for some volunteers to gauge interest is a good idea, because what would really be frustrating would be to put all the precursor effort into the whole thing leading up to it, recognizing that it's not very far away. It seems like it is, but it isn't when you're actually putting these things together. And then if step 4 is repealed or something's changed and it all has to be canceled, it's an enormous waste of time. So I'm kind of on that same page that if we don't have a lot of people raising their hand, that might be kind of a bellwether that people don't really care about it.
So maybe I could just clarify, are you, is the desire of council then to ensure that we have, say, a minimum number of volunteers before any planning happens, but that work can take place over the summer, over the remaining weeks of the summer? Because we don't have our next council meeting actually until September 7th. And so if council's looking to make a final call on whether or not to move forward, that's probably going to be too close to an event date to wait that long.
Right.
Well, I guess we're going to be waiting for that date though anyway. We're going to be waiting until, as you said, September the 7th.
Yes, September 7th will be the date. We know whether or not step 4 was going forward based on what we know
Yeah.
today. However, the intent was that we could line things up as best we could, and again, keeping it as simple as possible this year. And when we're lining things up, like the food for the SVFA or the marketplace, we would just ensure that people were well aware that if public health orders prevent us from holding the event, that we wouldn't be able to do it. So we would try to line things up as best we could, knowing that there's a chance it would be canceled. But again, what I'm sort of hearing from council is that you'd like to make sure there's a minimum number of volunteers who are committed if it does go ahead, which we can certainly have Ms. Perrin do between now and sort of towards the end of August. And if we say we need to have a minimum of 20 volunteers committed to participate in the event, then that's our green light to go ahead with the planning.
I think that's a great number, because I know how much work is in there entailed in setting up and moving tables around. It would have to be a commitment that they would be there for the whole day for setup and takedown. And I would also say to exclude the fire department, because they volunteer every day.
Yeah.
And I think that when they do come, they're there to get some volunteer hours in for part of their charitable donations and stuff like that goes into the fire fund. So I think they would have to be excluding the members of the Saskatchewan Volunteer Fire Department, and I think 20 is a great number. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, just one comment.
And then you-
20 is a great number, but I think we should let Sabina determine that. So
Yeah.
basically, she decides, this is what I need to put this event on, and she can make the decision.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Clare.
I agree. I was just going to say, she'll know exactly what we need, minimum, to make it happen. We haven't really spoke about the date, but I think definitely push the date to the 3rd week in September. We have a CC committee meeting on Thursday. I'm wondering if we could get our hands on remember we did the survey for events, and there were some other ideas. I have it in my file at home, but we did a survey last year. Well, longer than that, I guess now, just asking residents for ideas on what they would like to see.
Yeah, I can pull that out and have it
Yeah.
ready for your meeting on Thursday.
That would be great. And I think we can keep it simple. We don't need a band. We would hate to have a financial hit on something like that, but we can do live music. I think it's a good opportunity for everyone to get together, and I think if the marketplace, as long as everyone knows that there is that chance. I know there was been a little bit of an increase in numbers, so hopefully we don't start having more concern and we don't open on September 7th, but hopefully vaccinations will keep on and we'll be able to to get together.
Yeah, so just to confirm, that would be Sunday, the 19th of September?
Correct.
Which would give us almost 2 weeks to be able to manage whatever the health order is in regards to things. So-
That's correct, yeah.
Good,
So
okay.
I've got a
Yeah,
recommendation
sure.
here that I think would fit.
Sure.
The council support Ma Murray Day for 2021 to be scheduled for the third week of September, and proceed subject to public health orders allowing such an event and adequate volunteers being in place.
Good, good. Thank you. So moved, seconded. Any further discussion? See none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Perfect, thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to 11C, additional resources requirements. Report dated July 8, 2021 from Ms. Halliwell.
Thank
Ms.
you, Mayor
Halliwell.
McEwen. So this report is in relation to some additional resource requirements, a request for additional resource requirements in order to undertake operations of the village. The majority of the funds that are being requested are one-time funding. And so I'll walk through them. So there's 3 areas that we're looking to have additional support in. The first is procurement services. The second is the project management of the Anmore Community Hub. And the third is communication support, as has been discussed a little bit earlier. So for procurement services, the village has identified a number of requests for proposals that are required either based on current contracts coming up or projects that have been approved as part of the 5-year financial plan. And the 4 that we'd be looking to have completed this year are the solid and green waste collection contract, which is currently with GFL. IT support services, which has not gone out to market for at least the time I've been here, which is over 5 years. Printing services, we've been doing a lot more in terms of communications, and so contract for print services would certainly see some efficiencies in cost and reduce staff time to have to obtain quotes every time we want to do a newsletter or a communication out to our residents. And finally, the new website design and implementation. So as part of the 2021 5-year financial plan, a new website was approved for $80,000, and so we'd be looking for a company to come in and design and implement the new website for us. So in terms of the work itself that's required, so obviously a scope of work needs to be created, drafted, put within an RFP document. It gets posted publicly. We wait for responses, sometimes answering questions from the proponents while it's open. And then following that, we would typically review evaluate the responses and make recommendation for award. So typically that is something that staff can sort of take on within their workloads, namely because there's not quite so many of them all at once. It is quite a time-consuming process to go through the whole thing. And so I reached out to a firm that does this sort of work, and they've quoted 120 hours to do all 4 of those RFPs and all 4 of those stages of the RFP process, and they've quoted $25,000 to do that work. So I'm requesting that and to be funded from our accumulated surplus. And maybe I'm happy either way. I can either stop here and answer questions on that one, or I can go through all of them and answer all the questions at the end. Is there a preference?
I think we should go through it all, and then
Okay.
we'll, yeah.
Great. In terms of the project management for the Anmore Community Hub, so as we've mentioned, we're currently in the tender phase for this project. And we're expecting that to close at the end of this month and hopefully be awarded shortly thereafter. There has been, it's sort of well known that in terms of a project most effectively coming in on time and on budget, you really need to have somebody dedicated overseeing the project, overseeing the schedule, overseeing the budget, overseeing the product. And so we're looking, staff is looking to have a dedicated project manager on a part-time basis for the term of the construction window doing that work. And we certainly feel that there would be savings in terms of, review of change orders and that sort of thing to pay for this person to undertake that. We had originally proposed approximately $80,000 to $90,000 for a staff person to take on that role, which didn't include benefits. However, we did engage a consultant to help us through some recent value engineering, and I believe he would be a great fit to carry on. And so he would be a consultant rather than employee. So his hourly rate is higher because the benefits and everything else are included within that. And so we're anticipating the cost to be approximately $120,000 for that role. And I'm recommending that the role be funded from the capital reserve, which falls under where the community hub is being funded from as well. Finally, in terms of communication support, so council has part of their strategic plan to have an engaged community that is immensely proud of Anmore, and as part of that strategic plan over the past few years, staff has been working to increase communications both by method and frequency. And certainly, as I'm sure everybody's aware, with the increase in use of social media and that being a platform that we want to help to promote in terms of the village's information that's being put out there, we're looking to have some additional resources on an ongoing basis on staff in order to help support that. The intent is that this position will also provide some additional administrative support, which has been something that we've been trying to manage within the current staff levels, as far as sort of shifting work around a little bit as best we can, but it's become more and more evident that additional resource from an administrative standpoint would be very beneficial for us as well. And so that would become part of this role too. So this full-time role would provide both of those areas of support for admin as well as communications, which would still fall under Ms. Elric, who would oversee it. And that position would be recommended to be funded for accumulated surplus for 2021, which would be a portion of the year, and then added into the 22 budget when we deliberate that either later this year or early next year. In addition, we already have an annual budget for a communications consultant who is here tonight, and as a result of some unanticipated additional public engagement, particularly around Anmore South, that budget has actually been exhausted for this year in terms of that support, and so we're asking for some additional funds to see us through the rest of the year for that continued strategic communication advice. So we do see a continued need, regardless of having a staff person come on for communications, in having some more strategic communications advice. So obviously, Ms. Michelson is a professional in her realm, and if we have somebody on staff, they might not be quite as experienced. We would expect them not to be given the salary that we might be offering, and so we would look to have some continued additional support from Ms. Michelson as well, from a strategic communications standpoint. And in answer to Mr. Richardson's question, Council absolutely has the authority to approve budgets at any point during the year. The 5-year financial plan is adopted and must be adopted before May 15th every year, but that works towards a total operating budget that's allowed. So as long as essentially the village has not overspent what has been approved within the financial plan, we're fine. And however, even if that does happen, you are all well within your rights to amend the financial plan by law at any time as well.
Good. Before we move on, so I just before, if I can just sort of if we number them 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the recommended options, I'm going to make a suggestion that item number 1, 3, and 4 get deferred at this point, because I certainly am not in favor of them, but I'm looking forward to having a further discussion at our in-camera meeting, which follows this, regarding staffing. So I would like to defer 1, 3, and 4 in regards to that, so that we can have a wholesome discussion in camera regarding staffing. On number 2, I would just wonder why, when we put an RFP out for a position, I would like that struck from the $120,000, so it's an open RFP process, that those people wouldn't know that there's a budget line for that, and just simply put it out there and say, put the requirements of what we're looking for and that. So those are a couple of my points right now, but I'll now go to Councillor Trowbridge.
Are you going to respond?
If you wouldn't mind, just
My question was about putting out an RFP because of the size of the amount
Yeah.
too. So you
Right.
might answer my question.
Okay, so in terms of going out for RFP, that wasn't the intent for this. There's no requirement for us within these dollar amounts to go out and seek RFPs for staff. I can certainly do that at council's direction. However, as I said, we have brought on a person who I believe has met the requirements so far in terms of providing oversight. And so I would recommend that we continue on with that person and not go through the RFP process.
Councilor Weber.
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were...
Seriously?
Sorry.
I mean, you know my thoughts relative to Dennis Brown and his skill level. It's extraordinary. And I'd like to retain him, obviously, if that's possible. But, you know, it's just this amount is so large, I'm concerned about us not following the best possible practices relative to spending this money. You've said that an RFP is not required for staff, but this would be a consultant position. Is that viewed as staff?
Sorry, for clarification, it wouldn't be required under the partnership agreements. In terms of our policy, we do have policy around when we need to go out to market. However, council can always choose to direct award.
Okay. Well, others want to speak here, but whatever we do, it needs to be best practices, because this is a big chunk of change. I absolutely believe it'll pay dividends. I absolutely believe we need the position. As you know, I'm a strong advocate for that, somebody representing the village independently of any contractors or trades or anything else, to make sure we stay on plan, scheduling, budget, etc. So I don't think the dollar amount is based on most PMs in the industry is ridiculous by any means, but it's a lot of money, so I want to make sure however we do this, it's with best practices.
Councilor Weber.
Yeah, that's a big nut. I think it definitely should go out to RFP. I guess I won't comment on the other things other than we just did the budget, and I don't know why some of these numbers weren't in there. Am I missing something? But anyway, this one, it's still a consultant, and it's a very competitive market, and there's a lot of good people out there. I agree that the person we brought on for the meantime has done a good job, although started too late. I mean, we saw it go sideways with the architects and consultants designing systems that were way over budget. Obviously, the architect wasn't paying attention, and I think a project manager might have caught that. It just ended up, we've got it back in line, but it would have just been one step we didn't have to take, right? And I know Councillor Trowbridge got very involved in working with everybody to get that number back down again. But for $120,000, I think it's high. I think it should go out for RFP. I think, it's the responsible thing to do.
Okay. Any other questions on the project manager?
Could I just provide a little bit of clarification maybe on the others as well, just based on the comment that Councillor Weberank made about why they weren't included in the budget?
Okay, sure, yeah.
So the $25,000 for the procurement services certainly could have been something that, had I had a little bit more foresight, should have been included as part of that as well. However, in terms of the additional communications related support and the additional funding for the communications consultant, when we were deliberating the budget earlier this year, staff was not spending nearly as much time monitoring, reviewing, and responding to social media, and so it wasn't anticipated, because it couldn't be anticipated that council would provide the direction that they have in terms of how involved we've been in that realm.
Good. So getting back to the whole recommendation, then, is can I get some sort of agreement from council that items number 1, 3, and 4 will be deferred at this point until a further discussion? We are going to be, like I said, right after this meeting, we're going in camera. We have a staffing issue, and we can discuss it at that point in time. So can I get, move that, second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried unanimously. So 1, 3, and 4 are going to be deferred. And then number 2, that council approve one-time funding of $120,000 for the part-time Anmore Community Hub project manager position for a 1-year term to be funded from the capital reserve. Personally, I would like to see that project manager be in through completion of the project rather than just defined to a 1-year term, depending on what happens. But I would also like, I think what we've heard from council is that should go out to RFP. And if we can do it as soon as possible, because we do need somebody. The tenders are going to be back at the end of next week. We have about eight builders that are interested in the project. So I guess the recommendation, sorry, Councillor Trowbridge?
Sorry, can't seem to push a button. Yes, as long as we don't interrupt the process that we currently have, because Julie, Karen, myself, and Dennis are riding herd on this project in terms of budgets and being pretty proactive on that. And I don't know, you guys, if you agree or not, but I'd be terrified if there was a gap without Dennis there in between choosing a candidate and not. So if we can ensure that we keep Dennis on the job while we go through the RFP process, to me, that's critical. Do you guys have a point of view on that?
I agree completely, and certainly I would advocate very strongly for Mr. Brown to be involved through the review of the tenders and the recommendation for award, as I said, was planned for early August. And I agree that, we don't want a gap. However, I also don't think it's fair to ask Mr. Brown to continue on the process that he might not be seeing through all the way. So once we have the tender awarded and we've got everybody, we've got the contractor mobilized on site, at that point, this project manager would sort of be starting to oversee schedule and providing regular reports and things like that. I don't know that we would want to have Dennis as part of that process while we're going through the candidates search. Because that might give him an unfair advantage in an RFP process as well.
Right.
And so I would just, I guess, ask for some clarification from council. Are you then thinking, because I guess we'll need to determine what the discussion is at our next meeting, but I've asked for Procurement Services support. So in order to turn around an RFP, it's adding to the issue of the Procurement Services list that we have already to do another RFP and for it to be done quickly and turned around. And even then, it would be the end of August, middle of September at the earliest before we could get somebody in, I would say. Because we need to post it and we need to allow time for that, and then we need to evaluate and then come back to you for award.
Well, we definitely should not be evaluating tenders without an industry expert at that caliber. You pose an interesting conundrum here, but I'm not sure what the solution is, but I would like to express to the rest of council that we would be ill-advised to not have Dennis on the job when those tenders come in and evaluating those tenders. He has 45 years in this industry at a very high level, and I trust his judgment completely. So I'd be really worried if he wasn't in that process.
So I'm just going to go through some, sorry, Councillor Laidlaw.
I don't support an RFP process for a consultant. I think we should keep the one we've got. It makes sense to stay with this Dennis. However, I'm a little bit concerned about the $120,000 payment being put out as a blanket amount. I'd like a breakdown of how that $120,000 is being spent. For example, is Dennis being paid on an hourly rate, or is he being paid as a, for work per year, or what? Because if it's an hourly rate, it could certainly rack up pretty quick.
So if I could just respond through the chair, Mr. Brown is going through an exercise as we speak about what that scope will look like. He has provided an hourly rate, and he will be charging an hourly rate, but I will be seeing a proposed scope of services before anything is entered into. The request for the 120,000 is essentially a cap, so I'm looking for funding up to 120,000. And the reason it's here before you tonight is, again, we could certainly look at calling a special council meeting to review this at a later date, but this was the last council meeting we had before we expect the GCs to be mobilized on site.
What if this project goes on longer than, say, a few months? It goes on to a year or 14 months. Is it the same amount of money that we're spending on this guy, or?
So again, this amount, while we're expecting, that we've aligned it with what we were expecting from a construction window, and obviously everybody knows that there can be delays. So again, his scope of services will be for the entire project. So he's not just going to be charging us $10,000 a month for 12 months. He'll be charging for the hours that he's actually working. And if we come anywhere close to reaching that cap, certainly we'll be letting council know if we don't feel we're going to be able to see the project through with the amount of funding that's been requested, and we can make decisions at that point as to how to see the rest of the project through.
Can I just say a few things? Ms. Halliwell, I certainly understand the time constraints, and I understand that very much, and we should have been ahead of this probably, like Councillor Weberling, much earlier in that. I'm not comfortable. Two things. Number one is putting a year deadline. I think it should be a project cost. And then the second thing is I'm not comfortable as a member of this council authorizing this sort of payment to me, which is a large payment. I understand the necessity of it and the importance of it, but I'm not comfortable without some sort of being able to reference it against something else. So I'm wondering that maybe what we need to do is we need to wait till Mr. Brown gives us a detailed breakdown of what the project would cost. And then in the meantime as well, we do a bit of research of what a similar project manager would, because there's nobody that's going to know this project probably better than Mr. Brown at this point in time, because of his innate, his ability and understanding of going through the design process, which he's been a part of. So it would be interesting to find out what an hourly rate is, as Mr. Laidler said, to then be able to relate it to what the industry would be paying on something like that. So at least then we're not going into something what I would refer to as not necessarily a blind check, but an unknown as to if this is the value, because as members of this council, we are responsible for every member of this community in regards to every dollar that's spent. So I need to have something to justify what he is charging, if that makes any sense. And I don't mind coming in after, if he could have that by next week. We do have an open house, or a public hearing, as well as a council meeting next Thursday. I don't mind reviewing that after that, staying late or whatever, and getting it done. But I think that gives, I guess, about 10 days that he could get his report in order. But I think it's for the project. And then if we can get some comparables as to what similar project managers would be charging, I think he's probably in line. I'm not saying he's not, but I need something to be able to vote on it to justify my vote. So, Councillor Trowbridge.
Yeah, it will be a little bit difficult to get an apples to apples on similar PM. Junior PMs in BC right now are 95 to 100,000. An experienced PM's 120 grand. The reason I know this is because I'm trying to hire one. He's not just a PM, he's a qualified construction manager as well. I'm not, this is part-time, and that's a lot of money for part-time. There's no question. But I have spoken to Mr. Brown, and he has indicated that he anticipates things to be relatively status quo with his time for the first 3 months, which makes sense. And then when the shovels go in the ground, things start to come out of the ground, he expects to offload his other responsibilities and basically be on this pretty much full. So I don't disagree with anything that's being said. I'm hesitant to authorize this dollar value, and I'm equally hesitant to not have him on the job start to finish, because he has demonstrated an enormous amount of skill, and we need to bring this in on plan and on time.
And on budget.
That's what I mean by on plan.
Yeah. Do you have any, Councillor Weber?
Yeah, it's just, I wish we weren't just doing this now. We're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I agree with everything you said. If we, beat this around some more, we have to keep someone on once the tenders come in. We have to have someone on staff, whether they're hourly until we get someone permanent. But it just seems like a big, we've reduced the scope of the project. It's a smaller project. I don't remember this kind of number when we first started talking about this. I seem to remember it was a lot lower, the initial estimates. Perhaps a suggestion would be to just reduce the budget to something a bit more reasonable and see what we can get for that. Understanding like it is not, there's houses being built in Anmore as big as this, and I don't know if they have full-time project managers. Like, I think you can get different levels. We are on a budget here. It's not a super complicated building. I think it was. It's less complicated now. But I just don't see a complete win here.
Ms. Halliwell, would it be fair to forward to Mr. Brown that we need a number for the entire project, and then if he could get back to us by a week Thursday?
I can certainly reach out to him and make that request.
Yeah.
I think that, ultimately the best he'll be able to provide is the scope of services and his hourly rate, and what he anticipates is going to be the order of magnitude.
Okay.
And so we can certainly look, if you want me to go down the path of a fixed price contract for a certain number of hours, then there's risk on both sides where he might spend less time and we're paying for services we didn't, that weren't earned, or vice versa. We're not paying enough for the services that are being provided, and that has its own challenges as well. So I can certainly follow up with Mr. Brown, and we can look to include it on the special council meeting we have scheduled for next week.
Okay.
This is not a fixed budget, though. This is a cap.
That's correct.
And he, I assume, expects to come in underneath that.
Absolutely, yeah. During my discussions with him when he started looking at the scope of services before he had something more finite, he said that's a conservative number and I can't see going to that level at all.
Oh,
So this
okay.
is a budget envelope. This is
Gotcha.
an amount of
Okay.
funding that we would have to spend, but the contract and the review of that would be separate than just saying, here's a blank check for $120,000.
Yeah, and I would guard against a fixed contract in this industry in this day and time. Fixed contracts are absolutely padded to the nth degree to protect on that others. You're going to pay the maximum on a fixed contract, where that's not a good way to go.
So if we could get some more detail then on the entire project, would be great. And then to bring back, and we'll add it to a week Thursday special council meeting then. Thank you. We'll now move on to 11D. Mr. Boyd, you're up. The Canadian Community Revitalization Fund and BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant Program. Report dated July 14th from Mr. Boyd.
Thank you, Your Worship. It came to our attention a week or so back that there are a number of grant opportunities available to smaller communities. So there's two which are out there right now, the Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant. This one seems particularly poignant to Anmore because it's only open to residents of communities with less than 15,000 residents. So we're kind of in the right ballpark there. And it's kind of scheduled as well that there's actually different levels within that for. I'm doing my monitor. There's actually smaller levels for residents between 5,000, 10,000 and 15,000. So we qualify for the lowest one, which is giving us the highest level of eligibility of 70% of recoverable costs. So if the project was up to $500,000, we'd recover 70% of the $500,000. And then the next one, so that grant would be utilized to create our active transportation network, which would be our multi-user pathway that we've kind of started on that journey now, from where we've kind of recently constructed the sidewalk down Sunnyside Road and East Road. This would be a continuation of that pathway, but it would go from East Road to Summerwood this time. So we kind of create that piece of the pathway there to try and connect some of our more of our trails. So that's the envision of using that fund. And then the next one is the Canada Community Revitalization Fund. This one is kind of slightly linked towards COVID, and it's all about the federal government giving opportunities to municipalities to get their residents out and using public amenities. So our proposed Spirit Park upgrades, which were, I want to say 2-3 years ago now, that we looked at doing, but we didn't quite have the funds to move it forward. This is a fund that I would recommend that we use to try and create the Spirit Park revitalization, following the community hub construction, so it would fit nicely within there. And within that fund, that's a 75% eligible cost contribution there.
Good. So you have a recommendation?
Yeah, so I have a slightly modified recommendation. Just introduces a few additional numbers, so I'll read out the recommendation. The council directs staff to apply to the Canada Community Revitalization Fund grant for the amount of $400,000 for the redevelopment of Spirit Park project, and confirm the village's commitment to fund the required 25% contribution up to $100,000 to be funded from the capital reserve, and to provide overall grant management should the application be successful. And the council directs staff to apply to the BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant Program for the amount of $500,000 in order to continue the multi-user pathway along Sunnyside Road and East Road to Summerwood Lane, and confirm the project is shovel-ready and meets all the program eligibility requirements, and that the village commits to fund the required 30% contribution up to $150,000 to be funded from the capital reserve, and to provide overall grant management should the application be successful.
Someone to move the recommendation? Moved. Seconded. Any further discussion? Councillor Weber.
We have adequate funds in our capital reserve if we are successful, and also do we know when they're going to grant this? I'm sorry. Do we have adequate funds in our capital reserves, and do we know when they're going to grant these grants?
Through the chair, I can answer for the adequate reserves. We do have adequate reserves to fund the 100 and the 150 separately and together.
Okay.
And in terms of the announcements, they're typically not very forthcoming with when they want to make grant announcements. They're usually fairly broad in their responses. I think that for the federal fund, that they want the projects completed by March of 2023.
Oh, okay.
So it's not quite as rushed as the most recent grant programs we saw, where, you know, they just announced it last week and they want the project to be done by the end of this year. I think we've got a little bit longer to complete the projects, which means they'll take a little bit longer probably to announce as well.
Okay, so it could come up under next year's budget discussion.
Potentially, yeah. I would anticipate that we could see some announcements before the end of the year is out, because these are smaller funding programs, but it could be longer.
Okay.
Good. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Reverink. Or, sorry, Trowbridge.
Seriously?
Sorry.
So, this related to our other discussion, because you were talking about projects for the 28,000 or the 25,000, which this would be the kind of thing this individual would be writing up to apply for this, or do we have those resources now?
We have those resources. So
Okay.
essentially, well, fortunately and unfortunately, because we weren't successful in previous grants, we have a lot of the information already in existence in similar application forms, so we can transfer it over. So the request for the resources is not at all related to grant applications.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any other questions, comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Okay, thank you, Mr. White. We've got, move on to the mayor's report. I've got a few things. First off, Blue Pine will be returning this fall to fix all the boulevards, to get rid of all the mushrooms, and to actually get grass planted on there. They can't do it right now because it's too dry, but they will be coming back. I've been promised that.
Yes.
I'm getting lots of interesting emails and concerns of what we're growing there. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Boyd. Again, we have Trevor Mukel here from the fire department, and he can attest to the fire risk in this village is extreme right now, and please be careful out there and report any suspicious activity. I know the fire department was out the other night. There was a big fire in Belcara. The dock, Trevor, was it the dock that caught on fire? And
I wasn't on the call.
Oh, you weren't? Anyway, I had an update from the chief, and he said that we were very, very fortunate that didn't hit the trees, or it would have really been problematic. So please be careful with fire risk. It's, sorry, I have Bill Cook here. Sorry, I didn't even see you there, but were you at the call, or?
No, I had a drink, so I couldn't go.
Anyway, it's, I have updates fairly regularly with Chief Sharp, and he's really, really nervous right now. So please, everybody needs to be very, very careful out there. July 28th, for all of you who don't have your vaccination, they're opening up a COVID vaccination clinic at White Pine Beach on July 28th. So anybody who wants to get a shot and doesn't want to go to Poirier, you can get your shot at White Pine Beach on the 28th. Kind of an interesting location, and get some sun, get a swim, and get a shot. So anyway, we're doing really, really good in regards to people getting their shots and getting double vaccinated. Our numbers are up really, really high in the Tri-Cities, so keep it up. I know they're starting to have some problems in the States because it's becoming very political, and that, so we need to just get vaccinated. I also wanted to just have a brief comment and just a big thank you to staff, the RCMP. I hope, from what I'm seeing, we're doing a better job with the Bunsen Lake traffic. It's, we're putting a lot of resources into this, and we're really, I'm not getting the messages that I am from a lot of residents in the northern portion of the village. We put a lot of effort in this, had a lot of meetings, and it seems to be paying off. And it's still a work in progress. It all depends on the weather. I haven't heard anything about a real hot spell coming on again in that, but please, be cautious. This council is taking this very, very seriously, and we're doing our best to make sure that we keep the northern village clear so that our volunteers can get to emergency calls, and also everybody's safe and secure, and that we don't have any issues with people coming to and from their houses and that, if it's for work or whatever. I wanted to also put Mr. Boyd a little bit on the spot. He had a meeting with AGE and the sewer hookup. I'm a little frustrated from my update that I got today from talking to AGE and a couple other representatives. They don't have plans to get this pipe in the ground this summer, and I think that needs to change. And so what I'm hoping is, with the support of my council, I would like to call a meeting of all the interested parties, SD 43, AGE, some of our staff, including Mr. Boyd, and the ministerial facilitator, and in the next week, and make sure that everybody is here. We'll host it here and make sure that we get this on track and get this hookup done this year. I don't want to be waiting another year, and make sure that everything is there. And Mr. Boyd, if you just got brought into this last week by the province, and if you could just give a quick update as to what your findings were, if you don't mind. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but just to...
That's okay. So the findings is that there's been a number of kind of legal wranglings behind the scene with the school district, the Port Moody, and the AG, and so it's taken a long time to get those pieces in place, and the school district, through their bureaucratic system, won't allow someone to enter their lands until these forms and requirements are detailed out and the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and so it's taken a long time for all this to get kind of resolved. And I was in a meeting first thing on Monday, where it seems like we now have some action moving forward of sorting out these requirements, but again, by the time these things get resolved and then get to the next set of hoops, I don't really see this getting built while the children are outside of the school, which then will likely lead to increased cost for AGE, because the school district are somewhat adamant that any additional costs incurred regarding safety of children during school time will be transferred to the residents. So there's going to be some to and fro and back and forth here. So it's slowly getting resolved. It isn't quite resolved yet.
And I think it's important that residents realize that on this recent tax roll, which the Anmore put out on July 4th, we actually collected some money for the school for the actual hookup of this that had to come out of the 52 residents. Is that?
Yeah, 50 homes for the portion for the
Yeah.
school district.
Yeah, so they've paid this, and they're getting alarmed that it's not getting done. So I think we should add in a representative from Port Moody as well to that meeting, if we could, Ms. Halliwell, and if we could organize that, and as long as I have the support of council. But this needs to get done, and we need to get everybody in the room and get this done so that it's done as soon as possible, and then we can put this situation behind us. So.
Mayor McEwen, can I just
Yeah.
get clarification? Would you like ministry representatives invited as well?
I would like the facilitator, Deborah.
But
to-
not representatives from the various ministries that are involved?
I don't do.
Just from a,
I think it's needed.
well, I would say so because Deborah certainly has been hired by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. However, Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Education is also involved.
Let's get
so-
them here then. Yeah. And as soon as we can get it, I'll change my schedule or whatever, and we'll have it, and just, let's get this done. And Mr. Boyd, I heard quite a few people were very, very pleased that you were involved in it, so hopefully the province will continue with your services, and then we can get this done. From what I've been told, it's about a 2-week project once everything's all signed off, and then we're done, so. Okay, that's the end of my my mayor's report. I'll move on to councillor's report. Councillor Webber.
Just one thing, had a pretty good environment committee meeting the other day. Our topic was a committee roundtable discussion on environmental sustainability through development and preservation of green space through alternative development laws. I actually had pretty good engagement. Had Mr. Crump, part of the committee, had Mr. Richardson there, and I kind of opened it up to the audience. I'm not used to having people at my committee meetings, and we actually had some very good input and very good discussion. What came out of it, I think I'll talk about the salient points here. One member felt that the tree management bylaw is not being enforced. The committee would like the EC to review the tree bylaw in the interest of suggested changes for council's consideration. One suggested change was incentives to save mature trees, assuming that they can be saved without becoming a hazard. One member felt that an arborist report could be reviewed by the village's arborist, or the village's arborist could do all of the reviews of the tree applications. Interested in reducing lot coverage, house size for preserving trees. I don't know if that would be too popular, but that came up. And interest in looking at how density can be swapped for tree and actual forest. So I think one of the discussions that came out of it was the saving of mature trees and the saving of forests. I think we recognize that there are problems with a tree here and a tree there. We've discussed it many times. One thing we didn't talk about too much, because we don't have the information, is fire safe. And I know with this consultant, do we have any details of that $500,000 that was granted to Tri-Cities communities for this fire safe consultant?
I'll defer to Ms. Elric for that.
Through the chair.
Thank you. Through the chair. The City of Coquitlam is currently undertaking a recruitment process for the 2 positions, one being the fire consultant and the other being more of a education on Fire Smart. So once those positions are filled, then we will have a better plan of exactly what activities that they will be undertaking, but it will include assessments throughout the village.
Okay, because I just wonder if that's going to inform our tree bylaw if we were to look at it again. But I was going to ask council if they have the appetite to send the tree bylaw to the committee for review. And I have a resolution, a recommendation. Can I read it out?
Sure.
Okay. That the tree management bylaw be referred to the Environment Committee for discussion around possible changes and recommendation for council's consideration.
Someone to move it? Move, seconded. Any discussion? Again, it's just a committee, so it'll just be for a discussion. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Webber.
And that's about all I have. Thank you.
Okay, any other? No? No, that's all right. We heard you. Our CAO update.
Thank you. So maybe just for a quick clarification on the point from the Environment Committee, the village doesn't have an arborist, so we don't have one on staff. If we do need the expertise of an arborist, then we hire that out as a contractor. So I just wanted to make that clear, because that comes with a cost, of course, in terms of any kind of review.
Yeah, and that would have to be discussed with council and staff about how
Yeah.
those costs would be recovered.
Sure, and oftentimes if it's development related, then we can recover the costs through development and recovery of fees. But if it's outside the scope of somebody's individual development, or then we don't really have the means to do that at this
Right.
time.
And I know, tree bylaws are great things. There's always going to be the people that are happy about it, people that are against it, and it's just, but, I don't have any problem with the new committee, some new inputs. There were some good ideas brought across the table, so I'd like to discuss it a little bit more.
Sure, yeah, I just wanted to provide that,
Okay,
that
thanks.
information. So just further, I think the only thing I have really further to Mayor McEwen's comments about the extreme weather that we're having with the heat and the dry weather. A state of emergency was declared again in our province today. So I just encourage everybody to check out the Fire Smart info that we have on our website and take action around their homes to protect them. And also, we are at risk of air quality changing within Metro Vancouver as winds shift. So Fraser Health has been putting some information out, and I would encourage you all to check out what they have available. And mostly just if you've got anybody who's vulnerable with respiratory issues, to ensure that they've got somewhere to be able to be breathing clean air, and keep your windows closed and things of that nature. But Fraser Health has all the info on that. And that's it.
Good. We got 3 items in general correspondence, some communication from the City of Mississauga, communications from the Association Society regarding BC Ambulance Service, and communications from Pitt Meadows regarding BC Ambulance Service levels as well. So open up to public question period. Public is permitted to ask questions of council regarding any item pertaining to village business. A 2-minute time limit applies to speakers. Name and address, please.
Yeah, blue lights on.
Yeah.
Trevor Mukel, 275 Alpine Drive. Regarding the public hearing for Bellaterra scheduled for Thursday, July 29th at 6 p.m. This question is to Mayor and Council. Why schedule something this important on a Thursday before a long weekend when local residents are away, with everything opening up after a year and a half of COVID-19? The public hearing should really be in September if you really truly care about your community and what you want full public input. The optics are bad for the village, mayor, and council. It looks like you're trying to ram this through with the least amount of public input available. Mayor and council, will you reconsider and move the Bellaterra public hearing to September? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I believe the time, all the statutory regulations have been set?
The ads have been placed.
Yeah,
yes.
okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. Any other public questions? Come.
I have actually a couple of questions related to things which have come up. Can you hear me?
If you can speak a little louder, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Related to the extreme fire.
Name and address, please.
Oh, sorry. Nancy Maloney, 1724 East Road. I know that several other people here tonight are aware of this problem, and I wondered if we have a bylaw related to throwing objects, from people's cars, like a littering bylaw with a fine. It's a big problem that people are throwing cigarette butts actually onto dry grass. Mm-hmm. We have dry brush right in front of our property, and every day or so I find cigarette butts in the dry grass. And someone told me that cars no longer have ashtrays, which is why supposedly people are throwing their cigarette butts out of the car. But we also have a big littering problem. Like every day when I dog walk along East Road, I'm picking up Starbucks containers, food packaging. And I don't know how we could deal with this issue. Do we need signage? Do we need fines? But the big problem, of course, is cigarette butts. All it takes is for, one smoldering cigarette butt, to burn a number of properties to the ground.
What I'll do regarding the cigarette, I will follow up with Chief Sharp and see if he has anything that we could put fixed to where the fire rating boards are at both entrances to the village.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Completely against the law.
Yeah.
That's all over Canada. That's breaking the law. You should phone the police if you ever see somebody do that, and get their license plate number.
What I find is the evidence, yes. Oh,
Okay.
not the activity.
Yeah, and your other question?
One request, would it be possible to designate at least one, maybe several accessible parking spaces in the lower parking lot? Like, our parking lots have never been accessible friendly. Like, at most, there's only been one space, and we now have the lower paved parking lot, but of that somewhat larger area, there is not a single accessible parking space.
Something that we can look into. We had one here, but of course, yeah.
Sure,
please,
so we do have an accessible parking space here.
One is really not
downtown.
sufficient.
And in terms of the lower parking lot, we certainly will be looking at accessible parking as part of the new Anmore Community Hub. We'll have 2 spaces right out front, the front door, and we are expecting that the lower parking lot will be used the majority of it by the general contractor. So once we have the new Anmore Community Hub constructed, we will have more accessible parking spaces.
I am aware of that, but that's a long time into the future, and there's surely more than one person in our community who needs accessible parking at the present time. Not sort of like long into the future. It's not a big thing to put up a sign, an accessible parking sign for one of the existing spaces in the lower lot.
Okay, we'll look into that.
The other thing I wanted to mention, I noticed the other day when I came up to the Village Hall that we are using those very unenvironmental friendly black boxes for rodent control. And Coquitlam has actually just changed their policy. I don't know how many people have read this in the Tri-City News, but those are actually a very, very poor method of rodent control because the rodents are poisoned, and then various wildlife, owls for instance, eat the poisoned rodents, and then they die. So it's one of the absolute least environmental friendly ways of controlling rodents, and really we shouldn't be doing it, especially given our commitment to being an environmentally friendly community. And the SPCA actually can give you guidelines for free on what would be alternatives to the rodent black boxes that poison the rodents.
We can certainly look to do that with our exterminating service. So, good. Thank you.
One more thing.
Okay.
One more quick thing. Okay. I know this is not an easy problem to solve, but I'm quite worried that someone is going to get killed via bicycling in our community. Like, we have no bicycle lanes, and many spots, like on East Road where we live, you can't see traffic all that well, and especially when there's so much traffic related to the park. So what bicyclists are doing, because they don't want to get killed either, but they are riding their bikes on the pathway. But then this becomes dangerous for people who are walking on the pathway, and there are spots where you can't see that the bicycle is coming. So we need some more bicycle-friendly alternative, whether the pathways could be widened quite a bit. But definitely it's dangerous for bicycles to be on the road mixing with the traffic. But it's also dangerous for the bicycles to be on the pathway.
Good.
So
I think that's
we
something
need
maybe
to
we
look
can
into
pass
that.
on to the Parks and Rec Committee in regards to, yeah, perfect. Good.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
Any other public questions?
Doug Richardson, 2305 East Road. Councillor Laidler. At the last council meeting, you stated when asked, what have you learned with the urban-rural discussion? You said that Anmore is unsustainable as it is, or Anmore is unsustainable as RS1. As the Van Straits report of 2013 does not agree with that. Likewise, the Asset Management Investment Plan of July 2017 doesn't agree with that. I'm wondering why you made that statement. Do you have evidence, reports, something to back up your statement?
I don't think I have to. I made the statement, that's what I believe. You can quote whatever report you like. I disagree with them.
You disagree with the reports?
Yes.
Okay, so Anmore is unsustainable based on your internal belief?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. If you could come up, please, and name and address.
Good evening. My name is Teresa Reed. I'm at 1525 East Road, and I've been there since 1986. One comment on the communication portal that everyone's trying to solve, and I'm sorry I'm not social media, so I have no clue what's been going on. But I do receive notices from the village, all the weekly notices. And had I had more of an action item on the matter at hand with regards to the land designation change, I would have been more proactive. Sometimes less is more. You know, instead of being able to be directed to the website to look through everything, maybe have a short action item of what you're really trying to gather the community on. That may be of assistance. Now, just with regards to the proposed changes or on the land designation change.
Ms. Reed,
Firstly,
do you have a question?
yeah, I do. So I am hoping that I would request that council would look at one more option than rural or urban, and that would be parkland. And that's based on Mayor McEwen's participation on the chair of the Regional Parks Committee, where they protect more of the region's sensitive ecosystems and create new opportunities to connect with nature close to home. They have Metro Vancouver is working towards an extensive, connected, and resilient network of parks and greenways, purchasing tracts of forests and wetlands to support Metro Vancouver's climate strategy, since these lands can capture and store large amounts of carbon. Regional Parks fosters environmental interpretation, education, and stewardship through community development, and promotes a series of responsibility for and connection to the place in which we live. If anyone wants to read it, please go to Metro Vancouver. It's called Chat with the Chair. There, and it's not pertaining exactly, this is for our application, but since we are Metro Vancouver, we have to be proactive. Okay?
Good,
so,
thank
you know, I applaud you for this.
Yep.
I applaud you for your participation. And yes, we can keep Anmore in an environmentally sustainable place to live. And this extension would also complement Chris Point's proposal for the extension of greenways. If we could possibly utilize that land in a more environmentally friendly usage, and you all know the change of behavior since COVID. The traffic is not just summer weather. The traffic is change of behavior. The change of behavior people have to be outdoors. They've been stuck for a year and a half, and I don't really think that change is going away. They have learned a new, more healthier life. And they have overcrowded Belcarra, they have overcrowded Port Moody, and you know, this could be something very favorable for Anmore.
Well, I just want to say, Ms. Reed, thank you for being involved, because I'll tell you, from a regional point of view, our park usage is up substantially. It's incredible. You know, Belcarra Park received 1.3 million visitors last year, and it's not stopping. I agree with you completely. When we acquire land, though, we have to get board approval, and we also have to have a willing participant to sell the land. And most of the land that we are buying right now, which is out in different areas, is being bequeathed from families that want it to retain as either parkland or environmentally sensitive land. So until we have a willing participant willing to sell land, and then we can agree to a price, that would be the only way that we acquire parkland. And also, we have a whole inventory of land that we're trying to accumulate right now to be able to add on to some of our existing areas as well. So there are limited dollars at Metro Vancouver regarding this sort of endeavor. We've certainly upped the budget to what people thought were unheard of before the COVID, and it's actually paying dividends. So I think that the key thing is that we'd have to have a willing participant at Metro Vancouver to purchase anything like that.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
But for land use, you can change it to park or rural. We
It's
don't need
already-
urban.
Okay, well, it's
Correct?
already rural. We do have urban in Anmore right now.
I meant in the South Anmore
Right, yeah.
designation,
Okay, good.
where there's mature growth.
Okay, thank you. Any other? We got to go to an in-camera council meeting, so. Okay, move to adjourn? Moved. Oh, sorry, we have a resolution. Sorry, we have a resolution to close to the public. A recommendation would read?
That pursuant to Section 91C, Labor Relations or other employee relations, the special in-camera council meeting immediately following the close of the July 20th, 2021 regular council meeting be closed to the public.
Someone to move that? Move, seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody, for coming out, and I guess we'll see you next Thursday.